How do you find these pictures?
It's on the Twitter. I look at Twitter, there's this thing called historical pictures. And they send some pretty, most of the pictures aren't that great, but this one is really cool.
I love Twitter.
Most of the things on Twitter, you know, but yeah. All right, so what was this? What was the big scandal during the Grant administration about the Union Pacific Railroad? Credit Mobilier. The Credit Mobilier Company was supposed to build the railroad. Exactly. How did they get Congress? Okay, they got Congress to double that, but then what did they give members of Congress and the Grant administration? Yeah, so they're all kind of part of the deal. But now they're all part of the conspiracy. Which, by the way, isn't that clever? You give them money, you can kind of hide that, but you give them stock. They're kind of now stuck with that. So we're all breaking the law together. And Leland Stanford's the head of what railroad? And the Central Pacific, what railroad came from Omaha to the west? The other one. Union Pacific. Santa Fe would go through Omaha. So do it. And did we get to the chart? I'm just going to cough now. The Chinese Exclusion Act? We didn't? Okay, so, what treaty would the United States sign with the various Plains tribes that would, for the most part, divvy up the plains between the tribes? Yeah, that was that Fort Laramie Treaty, which basically set that precedent. Now you're part of the U.S. And we got to the time zones. This gives you an idea how railroad expansion went. So that's 1870. You see the Transcontinental. And look at it by 1890. Actually, you got to the realms of overproduction by 1850. This is actually 20 years ago. And they actually missed a few railroads. We probably don't have enough railroads now because it's such an efficient way to move things. But at the same time, we probably had too many then. 397,000 miles of track. One person we do need to know. James J. Hill will be known as the Empire Builder because he built the Great Northern Railroad. And I'll get to it in one second. We'll add one more thing to it. But he would organize the investors. A lot of the investors were from Britain. A lot of British investors got rich off either India or later stages of capitalism there, invested in U.S. companies. And the Great Northern Railroad would go from Chicago to Seattle, and then eventually Portland and Winthrop Helen. And in fact, their most popular passenger train was called the Empire Builder. And you see this area right here? To get people to use the railroad, they began to push for a national park called Glacier, and that's why there's Glacier National Park. It was because of James J. Hill and the Great Northern Railroad. But one more thing you have to get, they did it without land grants. Unlike the Northern Pacific and every other one that took these massive land grants where in those checkerboard pattern, they didn't take it. They did all through investments. So yeah, it was harder for them to get money. It was harder to get money, harder to get investments. But by giving them the loans and the land, those railroads just thought they could do anything, and they just wasted the money. Just pocketed it, went bankrupt. Where Hill, it turned out to be much more efficient. Doesn't always work that way, but he didn't take those direct subsidies. He took subsidies from elsewhere. But this railroad would become huge. When the Northern Pacific became bankrupt, the railroad who didn't get the land grants bought it. Then they bought the Burlington Railroad. They would also eventually accumulate many other railroads, including the Santa Fe. So James J. Hill, Great Northern, is today the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. One of only two railroads in the West, now that we're in the era of monopolies. The railroad that goes through here. And so that's the Empire Builder. Just had to mention him. And that Transcontinental Railroad, this is obviously stylized. It didn't quite look like this, but go right through that prime bison range. And yes, they would take pot shots from the trains as they went by. Go kill the buffalo as they went by. They were living. Yeah, you understand. And so, and it didn't quite always look like this, but this would be the direct conflict with the American Indians. So let's go back to the Plains Indians here. Because we have the miners, and then we have this railroad. Oh, so we already had that. So let's get right to 1864. I'm going to pick out a few events that happened in this. Sometimes you say it's called the Plains Indian War or the Indian War. They call it the Indian War this last stand of the Plains Indians. I could pick a lot, but I try to do mostly around Montana, or has some connection. But we have to start in Colorado at Sand Creek. And what happened was there is you have all these miners coming to Colorado, and Denver's starting to become a commercial center. Well, they're going to send out buffalo hunters to feed them. And that's going to come into direct contact with the Cheyenne. The Cheyenne had a massive range here, and some of the best buffalo range in the world. Well, in the U.S., bison range. And they just called the herds, and we just killed them. And they could see, the writings on the wall. There seem to be all these people coming, these whites from the United States, and if we don't stop them now, we'll lose everything. So they begin to kill buffalo hunters. But check out the year. What's going on in 1864? There's not only election, but it's right in the middle of the war, isn't it? We have the Civil War going on. And we don't think about Colorado Territory as being a theater of the war. It's a long ways from Gettysburg, let's say. But leading Kansas is right there. There were battles when the Confederates tried to take New Mexico, and they'd be fighting what's going to become Arizona. Texas is right here. And Oklahoma, that was the Indian Territory. And tribes like the Creek and the Choctaw and the Chickasaw, Cherokee, they joined the Confederacy because of their hatred of the United States. They didn't like the Confederacy, but the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. So there were well-armed militia because of the war in Colorado. And they thought it could be part of the Civil War. So they sent out militia, pretty well armed and better trained than normal because of the Civil War out under Colonel James Chivington. And they couldn't find any of the encampments of the Cheyenne that were actually attacking the buffalo hunters. But they found a tribe. Now remember, American Indian tribes, there's no real leader, but the United States always wanted to deal with a leader, so they called it Black Kettle's Band. They were what they called then treaty Indians, meaning that they had signed a treaty with the United States, Black Kettle did, saying they will not attack buffalo hunters. In fact, they even flew an American flag to show that they were peaceful. But when Chivington got there, desperate to try to make a name for himself and didn't want to go back to Denver without doing anything, and he figured, what did it matter to Cheyenne? He ordered an attack. And a couple things about that. First off, this is terror. The tactic is terrorize them. The idea being, we'll slaughter peaceful Cheyenne. What will we do to the Cheyenne that actually are doing it? So this is a horrific tactic of terror. And secondly, and I do want you to get down, this is winter. They did it in the winter. Nomadic tribes would hunker down in the winter for obvious reasons. You eat the food that they saved from the summer, and what a perfect time to attack. They're stationary. They're easy to surprise because it's bitterly cold on the plains. And so that would be when they would attack. And I should add, this would be the template of how the United States would defeat the Plains Indians for the rest of us. Winter campaigns. Winter campaigns. And so, one more thing they would normally do is take hostages. The United States would find usually women and children, take them hostage, a way to coerce that tribe to surrender. Especially if they thought they might not be able to defeat them, completely get hostages bring them back. Which I should add is just horrific, but that was the strategy. The norm. But they didn't do it here. Chivington gave the order to kill everybody there. And the reason he did is because, well, when he was asked, I jumped the gun there, he was asked by another officer, what about the children? I thought I was going to take them hostage. Which is just so amazing. The humane thing would be to take them hostage. And Chivington said, no, of course, kill them. Nits make lice. And that's what Chivington said. You know what nits are? The eggs. So kill them. Remember back before 1811, I talked about American Indians, and they're looked on as like democratic, the true liberty, and Europeans had never seen anything like it. So they had that kind of weird contradiction. Yeah, we want their land, but these are the freest people in the world. How that shifted after 1811 to vice. But what a way to justify taking the land, isn't it? They're just wasting it. They're parasites. And coincides with coming up to the most racist time in history. So with that, they attacked. And they would end up massacring over 400. Hundreds would escape. It was a big camp. Black Kettle would escape along with others, partially because Shippenton's men were so drunk that they left some free. But Shippenton would be seen as a hero. This was made in the early 1900s, and this is the Sand Creek battleground. And this was seen as the great victory at Sand Creek. So this was made when they sort of tried to call it like a battle. No, it was just an outright massacre. Especially when a lot of the young men who were connected to Black Kettle, they went off to join the other tribes because they went to go attack the buffalo hunters. So it was mostly children and the elderly. So we're not, I'll tell you one more thing about Black Kettle a little bit later on. But this would become the template. Winter campaign, surprise attack, hostages. So the U.S. tactics, though, overall, on the grand scale, is to subdue the Plains tribes. And I got to repeat, this was a tragic last stand. There's no chance, really, the United States now with the numbers of people and technology, but divide and conquer. The tribes fought each other. Remember, the British did the same thing. You know, find the enemy of a powerful tribe. Like, for example, the Crow tribe hated the Lakota. And all the 12 sub-tribes of the Lakota just hated them. So the U.S. Army used the Crow to defeat the Lakota. And to defeat the Lakota and the Cheyenne, they hated each other. And then, after that, then the U.S. would subdue the Crow. And so divide and conquer. Pretty common. Empires have done that for all time. You know, the Romans did this. Speaking of the Romans, they did the next thing too. They call it the concentration policy, but think in terms of reservations. Okay, once you're conquered, put them on the reservation. And this does a couple of things. First off, it opens up land or whatever you want. The United States want to use it for, homesteads or ranching or cities, whatever it might be, railroads. But the other thing is, if you force them on one piece of land, totally different than what their way of life has been before, then embrace them. Just embrace their spirit. And that's an easy way to subdue them. This was a conquest. This is empire, even though we call it part of our own country. And the United States, or Montana, has a lot of reservations. So this has been, you know, Montana has been has had many direct effects because of this. And lastly, those who will not go to the reservations take the tactics that they used in 1864 and 1865 to the Plains. Total war. Remember, it's Sherman who started this. He'd be the head of the army through most of this. General Sheridan, he would be in charge. He was in charge of the cavalry under Grant. He'd be in charge of the Department of the Missouri through much of this war. And Grant was president. Sometimes you see this called economic war, so I just wanted to put that in there. It's essentially the same thing. The reason I'm doing that is in a couple of AP exams, they call total war economic war. So I just want to make sure you add that term so you know it's the same thing. But in reality, it's total war. And here's the thing. How do you destroy those who will not go to the reservations? What do you do? Especially in the summer, they run away. You got to find them in the winter. They're small. How do you starve them to death? You kill the mice. Kill all the mice. And so there's going to be buffalo hunters coming out there because of the miners and then the railroads, but then the U.S. Army is going to protect the buffalo hunters. They will arm them. And you combine that with the railroads. So this is the railroads here, and the blue one's the first Transcontinental. The first wave of the buffalo hunters coming into the Plains would be here, where the Cheyenne were, and they just destroyed them. I'm going to only pick out a couple wars, but there were huge fights here. Huge fights. And then up here, and the last would be here. And remember, there aren't very many Plains Indians because they're nomadic. And I should add one more thing. I'm not going to talk about this battle, but part of this happened in 1869, a hero of the Civil War, right about here, running down the Cheyenne. Same kind of thing, a winter campaign to try to bottle them up so they don't to the buffalo hunters or the railroad workers and homesteaders are moving in, would be one of the heroes of the war, the Civil War. He had a temporary, or it's called brevet rank of Major General. His name was George Custer. But after the war, all these generals lost rank because the army is so much smaller. You don't need many generals. So he went from a general to, at first, a ranger, but then he was a lieutenant colonel. And he was the second in command of a cavalry regiment called the 7th Cavalry. And they actually found a Cheyenne band right about here on the Washita and did the same exact thing that happened. Well, they tried to do the same thing. They almost got slaughtered. The 7th Cavalry got slaughtered themselves there. It was the same band that Black Kettle had. Exact same thing happened. But then Custer almost went into a trap. But he's going to be one of the most famous of these new. The Army's tiny, but one of these Indian fighters. We'll come back to him, obviously. We mentioned the railroads, but these are the buffalo hunters. And before I get back to this picture, I kind of went out of order for reasons I can't explain, but not a big deal. And the thing about killing the buffalo, you know, there's stores, especially in Kansas and Colorado, but also eastern Montana, where there'd be a plane of 10,000 passengers, just 10,000 there. And a 4-man buffalo hunting team, shooter, 2 skinners, and the cook. Although, which jobs do you not want to have? Nightmarish, the skinner. Everyone to be the shooter, obviously. All you had to do was shoot the lead bison, and the rest would just mill around. So you just pick them all off, bang, bang, shoot until you run out of ammunition. Shoot until your rifle barrel turns red hot. Just bang, bang until they're out. And then what would they do? The skinners will go out and skin them, which is horrifically difficult work. The really thick cotton on the buffalo. Skin it, scrape off the meat or whatever it might be, and you come up with this big thing. And they would bale them up like hay and send them back westward. By the way, what would they use with them? You can only make so many coats that are really heavy, really heavy. And so that would be, maybe if you're a soldier on the Great Plains in the winter, and they would have soldiers who would wear the buffalo coats. In fact, that'd be the name given to the black soldiers who would wear those. Some were based in my hometown in Miles City. But you want to know what they did with them? You think rugs and a few other things, but that really thick leather, they would take that to make the belts for the new factories. Because it's so thick, they could turn the machines. That's what they use it for. And then, in the 1880s, they went and got all the bones. And they gathered them all up. Think about millions of buffalo killed, bison killed. I'm sorry, I try to say bison, I can't help it. But you can't find a bone now. There's no way you can find a bison bone in the plains now. No way. They gathered them all up. That is a real picture in 1890 in Kansas of buffalo skulls. And it's not on a hill. That's a pile of them. It's on top. That's one of those pictures you almost want to say that's got to be made up, or they did some kind of Photoshop or something. No, it's the real deal. They're standing in front of them. What did they do with the bones? They put them on trains and sent them east. What did they do with them? Exactly. It was fertilizer. Bone fertilizer. You can buy bone fertilizer now. Someone suggested the other period glue. You ever heard of glue from bones? But it had been out in the sun for a long time, so it wasn't good for glue. I don't know what a weird way to put it, but that's why you can't find a buffalo bone today. And so they massacred the buffalo. And so beginning in the late 1860s, 1870s, they came into Wyoming, South Dakota, and Montana. And that's where we get to another war. It's called Red Cloud's War. And this is 1866 to 1868. So it's right after the Civil War. The Army now, is reduced down to about 1/100th of its size, and there's reconstruction going on. And so there was a trail built by John Bozeman that went from, well, first is the Oregon Trail, but also the UP will be running into it in a couple of years, that went up to go feed the miners. What city would be named after him? Great Falls. Exactly right. It was Great Falls because he was clumsy. And so the U.S. Army, though, built a couple forts on this because they know they're going right through prime bison hunting grounds for the Lakota and the Cheyenne. And they wrap on a couple other tribes. But the Lakota were the biggest, so We don't have time to go into every detail about that. But Red Cloud was one Lakota. There he is right there. That was taken years afterwards. And he and the other warrior chieftains decided, well, we're going to have to cut this road off. Because if we don't cut it off, more will come. They knew what happened in Colorado. And so they cut off the road, besieged one of the forts here, Fort Phil Kearny, which they didn't think the Lakota could do. They thought they were too disorganized and wasn't enough of them. In fact, in an attempt to break the siege during it, a Captain William Fetterman, who earlier bragged that he could destroy the entire Lakota nation with 80 soldiers, rode out with, in fact, saw a few of Lakota, including Crazy Horse, meaning Contra too, on a little hill, and saw them and went rashly chasing after him over a hill outside of the fort with how many men, right? 80. Got caught in a gully. This is right above the gully where they built a memorial. And all of them were killed. All of them. And that's where you get the term Fetterman's Massacre, even though that wasn't quite like Sand Creek. I mean, that was a fight. That was an actual battle. But there's another fight called the Wagon Box Fight. But the thing about it is that the Lakota won. They won. The U.S. Army could not do anything. The Army was too small. They signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868 and acknowledged defeat, closed the road. But partially being just cheated, but also Red Cloud and others agreed, we got to go to a reservation. They could do the math. They could see the numbers. If we don't, they're going to kill us all. They're going to. And so we got a massive reservation. In fact, it's going to be called the Great Sioux Reservation. Almost all of western South Dakota. The Black Hills was technically not part of the reservation, but since for some tribes it was seen as a holy ground, but for other tribes it was just incredibly important. Think about it, you have to have a teepee. You need long, straight lodgepole pines. Where do you find lodgepole pines in, let's say, eastern South Dakota? You go to the Black Hills. So it became just such an important center. And it is a pretty spectacular place. Has anyone been there? It's really cool with a lot of tourist traps. Lots of tourist traps. But these beautiful rugged mountains out in the middle of the plains. Because of the rugged northern plains. You see this kind of, if you're going this way across South Dakota, which is a beautiful. And if you're going this way, you see this kind of black hump that gets bigger and bigger. It's kind of startling. Another one, if you get a chance, go. It's really cool. Another beautiful drive is go across Nebraska and into Colorado. Oh, it's stunning. We should take a field trip, get a yellow school bus, and take that drive back and forth across Nebraska. This is just flat as flat can be here. If you ever see that part of Colorado, then you got that wall of mountains. It's pretty spectacular. I admit, that's pretty cool. In Colorado, you know, Montana's mountains too, but it doesn't have that wall, it seems like. So, and all the areas in orange, that would be open for American Indians, basically whatever tribes there, but mostly the different branches of the Lakota and Cheyenne were there too. They could hunt here. And so the Bureau of Indian Affairs would feed them here and then they go hunt. Basically the summer would go out there. And how long was this supposed to be? Forever. One other thing I should add, I went here when I was 17 to Fort Phil Kearny. I've been there a couple times, but the first time I went there, and I know you're not going to believe this, but yes, we actually had automobiles when I was 17. We had to push them, but we had an automobile. So we drove down there. In fact, I think it was my dad and my brother, just us three, and then we're going to go to Yellowstone, kind of make a loop around there. And we went to Fort Phil Kearny, and it's really cool. It's really neat. You can see how they set the fort up, and it's right near a bunch of places. You also can see how the siege would happen, where the Fetterman battle was. But there were a lot of grasshoppers. You take a step on those kind of grasshoppers. You've been around that, right? You don't get as much here in Helena. Well, there were more and more. We got in a car and started driving kind of northwest, and we could see this fog ahead of us. And then we got closer, and the fog, it wasn't a fog. It was a swarm of locusts. I mean, that's grasshoppers, just everywhere. Thousands of them. They just were hopping all over the place. We could not see the two-lane road. We're on a two-lane highway. The road wasn't always all with grasshoppers. Because grasshoppers covered every inch of it. So you drive and it's just this wave of them. And it's crashing all over the place. We drive over them and it sounded like popcorn. And not so much running over the grasshoppers, which was part of it, but they're all jumping up at the same time and hitting the bottom of the car. Just bah, 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 bah. And grasshoppers everywhere. People were sliding off the road because their wheels were skidding on the grasshopper guts. It covered our entire car. We saw somebody who left their door. They left their window open because they tried to get out to try to scrape the grasshopper bits off, and their car was full of grasshoppers. I mean, full of it. And, oh, it was fun. I've never seen anything like this before, and they ate my brother. Just boom, gone. And then, yeah, that's the story. Actually, you know, the locusts would eat paint off of houses. They strip it clean. They eat nothing. So this is about as close as I saw. And we finally got out of it. And our car was overheating because it clogged up all the air vents. And we opened up, I mean, you couldn't even tell. We had a white car. It was not white, it was grasshopper guts. And we opened up the hood, and literally there were mounds of grasshoppers in there, in all the ductwork, everything. We're pulling out handfuls of just grasshopper guts. How was your lunch, by the way? And the smell, I'll never forget that. So if anybody talks about locusts, it wasn't like the full-fledged one, but like they're in the Dust Bowl, or they just had a big one across southern Russia. That ate thousands of acres, just stripped it all. It's terrifying. You can see why when you drive into that, this might be the end of the world kind of thing. So I still want you to go to Fort and bring me back a bucket of guts. Okay, so with that, all this would end. The last thing, oh, I can finish this. The Great Sioux War. And this would culminate the end of the Lakota Sioux. I know I have to go very fast over this. It's actually a pretty amazing era, and it really is a tragic last stand. But it all started because in the Black Hills, which is supposed to be off limits to wide exploration, but for very political reasons, the U.S. cavalry, so the Army, would send an expedition. And it just happened to be led by the second in command of the 7th Cavalry, George Custer. And he was at Fort Abraham Lincoln, which is Bismarck, North Dakota. And they went into the Black Hills and reported there was gold. So you can imagine what's going to happen by 1875, a gold rush. And that's where you get towns like Deadwood and Lead. I know it should be lead, but they all call it lead. We think lead because that's what you find. But anyways, all this swarm came in and infuriated the Lakota, who were not getting the food they were promised on the reservation. They knew that the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Indian agent there, was cheating them. And so thousands left to go to this unceded land. And the U.S. ordered them back. Even though they had it by treaty, we said, nope, you can't leave. And if you leave, you're a hostile. And this was actually part of the plan. They figured, well, the ones that would be the most difficult to reform, let's let them go. And then give the excuse to destroy them. So a campaign that actually started at the end of 75, but mostly 1876, would be to destroy thousands of Lakota, Cheyenne, other tribes, but we just get here. The majority were Lakota with a huge, significant number of Cheyenne. And it was a massive army operation. In fact, the U.S. Army was tiny. So this is almost the entire army. And they were badly equipped. These poor guys. But a column here by Civil War hero George Crook. A column here under Civil War hero John Gibbon. And then under a general by the name of Terry, that included the 7th Cavalry. The idea was to bottle them up. And right about here would be one of the biggest battles. This place called the Battle of the Rosebud, where this massive Indian method, they assumed the massive was maybe 1,500, turned out to be as many as perhaps 5,000. Why was 5,000 unusually big on the plains? How do you feed that many people in the plains? There's no food. So nobody expected it to be that big. George Crook is one of the best United States officers from the Civil War. A little bit kind of shaky in some ways, but his army was nearly destroyed here at the Roosevelt. And it's a pretty interesting battlefield because no one ever goes there, so you go there. Not as many grasshoppers. Snakes, but not as many grasshoppers. That's where I saw like a little pit there, and it was just full of like balls of snakes. Do you ever see one of those? It was like a ball of rattlesnakes. It was disturbing. But you're like, yeah, the snakes aren't right anyway. There's nothing wrong. They don't have legs, right? Well, they do have little nuts. I'll get close. Of course, I have eaten rattlesnake once. It's either me or him. So was that. But Crook never told anybody what happened. He was defeated and retreated back to the Bighorn Mountains and fished. I'm not kidding. They went fishing. But to find this huge tribe they knew somewhere was there, General Terry broke off the 7th Cavalry to try to find them. And their orders were to wait, but no, they never waited. And the reason why, they thought, if we wait in the summer, what will the Lakota do? Run away. And so they saw them attack, not realizing how big the band is going to be. We're getting to the Battle of Little Bighorn. It was at the Battle of Little Bighorn that's when a snake struck at me. And that is not as pleasant as you think. It was probably this far away, but it seemed about that far. Anyone ever had a snake strike at him? It'll wake you up. It perks you up. I jumped about 8 feet, and that is no exaggeration. I know you know I had reach. I had hopped when I was a youth. All right, so we got a little bit of reading. We'll finish up this on Monday and then get to limited liability. You don't see the I have a question.
But I just feel bad.
Have a good weekend. Brenna, come in. So you leaving?
Yeah.
Probably she needs to go.
Yeah.
Well, that's something to be
I
sorry.
really like your place.
I mean, I understand, but it would be a shame to see you go. I know you have friends in here, and I think you like it.
Yeah, I really do like this class so much.
But you know, you have to do what's best for you. But I understand. I mean, I understand, but I'm not kidding. It's a shame to see you go. Who are you gonna ask? Mr. Ellis. He's a good guy. He's a really good guy.
Yeah,
so.
I really like him.
Don't tell him I said he's a good guy, though. No, he is. Oh, no, you have a lot. Good. By the way, you asked a really good question about Hitler. Why would he want to destroy the government? That didn't make sense. You asked about why, when they couldn't understand Hitler's motivation and all that. Oh, yeah. I'll tell you guys, but Britain and France had the same problem before World War II. They couldn't wrap their mind around somebody that actually wanted another World War. Oh, really? They couldn't. I mean, looking back now, we're like, oh, great, Hitler was playing. Yeah, it's just like nobody that would make sense that you wouldn't think that. They thought he was just talking for some political reason, not realizing that he really meant it. Dang. Wow. And that's hard to deal with somebody who acts that irrational. That he thinks irrational. Yeah. Look at that. Oh, what a over the shoulder? Yes. Connor, if you get a first why do you do this to yourself, Matthew? I don't understand that. I want to see how I can move uncomfortable.
This is me.
You gotta make the play. Yes.
Who's neck and rocks? A child's neck, maybe?
I just have too many flashbacks.
Oh my gosh.
I want to graduate. Why?
Yeah.
This will go on your record.
Yeah. You got a little heavy.
I get round two. Well done. What the? When did it get eyes? Delaney. She put eyeballs on everything. Everything. All my roommates. Yeah. Yeah, that was hers. The eyeballs moved, but I had to.
When I first saw that, it took me a minute to get. I'm like,
Yeah, so she put eyeballs. I mean, she had, I don't know. She thought it was a combination of artistic and fun.
my big brother is watching. Where that is still behind us. Das es Frisbee, Doc.
And there's still
Karl Marx.
all the
I forgot what it is.
well, that was 2 years ago, wasn't it?
Just silly, really. Karl Marx.
Before you used to do the people used to call it.
Oh, there he is. Das es Frisbee, Doc. Das Capitals.
Where do you look for gold? If you look for gold in Australia, where do you look for silver?
Where is everybody?
Australia.
I didn't expect it.
You gotta see Mr. Diola do that. He can do everything with a on his back. I never was very good at this. I never could do it.
It's way easier with like old, not old.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is for the ultimate because you have to be hard.
So that way when you hit them in the head, it's too hard to actually get all things. No, that's the muscle.
Oh, that's how you get a little bit of fake or a draw on it. Yeah. Never done that.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I think you ever go to Lisa work, you're looking forward to having.
By the way, where were you the week before this break? What did you bring us? When I mean us, I mean me, of course.
Good attitude. Good attitude.
And what will that get?
Let's see what it gets you.
So like the protest for Vietnam.
Peace Jones.
Oh! What happened? What have you done with your row?
He's charitable.
He's
I like business. What? Yeah, they were hidden. All right, so let's go take out the worksheet for war.
Mr. Parsons,
Yabo.
what is your opinion on the wall?
On the wall, the Berlin Wall?
No, the Mexican wall.
It was already torn down, you snow.
Mr. Gorbachev, please turn it down.
I keep my opinion to myself, but I do find it amusing that people actually believe. I don't think anyone ever believed that it was a good campaign slogan. Nobody knew that. I mean, it's a metaphor for something.
How long do you think the government
For
It's bad. And I feel really bad for the people who are federal employees. I was talking to someone who's a TSA agent, and he's talking about how they work, they have this essential job, they have to go work. And it's not exactly
He said that there's like a lawsuit that said that's trying to claim that they can't make government workers, they can't force them to come to work if they don't fit. And that it's like somewhere.
yeah, but it's
yeah, there's talk about that, but it will.
it's beneficial to come into work because if you don't go into work, you have exactly.
With essential jobs, the government can, the United States government has that leeway to decide on essential jobs. You have to equivalent of what an essential job actually is, but they have that. They can do it. And that's been precedent. Okay, so let's go ahead and take out the worksheet for the video. And I was thinking about one more thing. Remember at the end I told you Hitler lied about everything?
Well, yeah.
And what was the big advantage about lying about everything?
They never know what's true.
Yeah, you never know what's true. But there's one more advantage about lying about everything. And I was going to say this, but Bill got ready to ring. But one more advantage you should have. You know the thing about lying about everything? Most people, no matter how actually intelligent they are, and you know they people work hard, but they don't necessarily pay attention to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so you can play on people's ignorance. I'm calling someone ignorant does not mean they're dumb. But just, I mean, life is hard. It's a lot of work. And sometimes people are going to be ones following all the details of things. And so that's a great way to take advantage of them. Not only people not really know what the truth is, you know, they don't know enough anyways, especially about their history. You know, they don't know. So you tell them something that sounds good. Like the Treaty of Versailles was actually part of a great plan by the British and the French to destroy Germany. No, wait a minute. There was a little thing called World War I, remember? And so, with that, let's go ahead and get to, are we on number 12? Yeah. Oh, I got to show you two pictures. I found two great pictures. Let's see if they don't